Hello, this is Professor Marie Leone, and today's video lecture is from the Right Thing to Do textbook, and we will talk briefly about Chapter 1, A Short Introduction to Moral Philosophy, and then I will talk about Chapter 2, which is some basic points about arguments. I'm not going to talk too long about Chapter 1, because that is kind of an overview of everything we're going to cover this semester. So I'm just going to give you some structure with it and draw your attention to some of the pertinent schools of thought that we will be covering later in the semester. Chapter 2, however, is extremely important as we're going to start writing and forming our ethical arguments this week as we post our first video argument on bioethics and talking about cloning, genetic manipulation, and selling human organs. So we are going to start to apply our understanding of ethical structures to particular moral arguments. And as we do that, it's extremely important that we know what I'm expecting as a good argument and what that means. All right, so to begin, let's first go to Chapter 1, A Short Introduction to Moral Philosophy. All right. So the overview here, we begin with the Platonic story dialogue of Plato from Plato's Republic, talking about the ring of Gyges, Gyges. And Plato asks the question, if you had a ring of invisibility and you could wear that and not get caught doing a crime, would you take advantage of it and wear the ring and not get caught wearing the crime? It's a very ancient question, and one that asks if something is wrong, even if no one knows you did it. I'm not going to address that question. It's kind of the topic of the entire semester. Trying to figure out what's wrong or right, even when no one is looking. Okay. After that discussion, Chapter 1 goes into some of the historically significant ways of thinking about moral philosophy. The text discusses relativism, cultural relativism, divine command theory, virtue ethics, natural law, the social contract, altruism versus egoism or self-interest, utilitarianism, and then gets into Kant, which is deontological moral structure, or principles in short. Right. So obviously getting into each of these opens up the discussion on each area, and as I said already, we're going to break these down one at a time throughout the semester. So don't worry if you find it a little overwhelming looking at the first chapter. You can instead take these one at a time as we encounter them in our subsequent weeks. Okay, that said, I am going to move to Chapter 2, some basic points about arguments. Now, These are, I hope it's obvious that when I say arguments, I do not mean fighting or hitting or name calling or any of these other ways that we use the word arguments. What we mean within the context of an ethics course, a philosophy course, is talking about arguments which are logical arguments, rational arguments, making a case for your particular ethical position. When we do our video arguments, our position discussions, we're going to state what our opinion is about something, and then we're going to support that opinion with rational reasons why any rational person should accept our point of view as the true or right point of view. If we can then support our position not only with good reasons why you should accept our point of view as the right and true point of view, if we can then support it with facts, right, actual verifiable evidenced facts, we make a pretty strong argument for why our opinion should be considered preferable, true, and right, and why any rational person should accept our opinion. Now let me pause there for a moment and address the topic of facts, F-A-C-T-S, facts. I have encountered in teaching this course a very weak understanding of what makes something a fact. Facts are things that can be supported with evidence, claims that can be supported with evidence. Evidence comes only from our five senses, our sight, our hearing, our taste, our touch, our smell. In short, science. Facts have to be observed not just by one person, but by multiple people. Facts have to be recreatable. For example, to know that gravity exists, I don't have to drop an apple off the roof of this building and demonstrate that the apple falls, but it has to be the case that any person that goes up there and drops the apple will have the same outcome. So science is based upon the recreation of predictable outcomes. To call something a fact, it has to be subject to that level of proof, that any person who conducts the same experiment, dropping the apple off the roof, will get the same predictable outcomes. That's science, and that's where facts come from. It's the only place facts come from. If you cannot recreate an experiment and have the same outcome, you don't have a fact. You might have a hypothesis, you might have a high probability, but you don't have a fact. This, I'm sure, will come up again and again as we go through our arguments and look at things. But that's a starting point, is understanding that we base our objective truths and knowledge upon factual claims, not things that are merely believed. So I can believe whatever I want, but I can't assert it as true, and I can't assert it as knowledge unless It is factually based. Now, you can get into the meta arguments about scientific foundations of knowledge, but this is not the place for that. That's a metaphysics or philosophy of science class, and this is an introduction to ethics. So that's our foundation of this course, that we will begin by basing our arguments on facts and the consistency of reason. Okay, that said, let's talk about reason. The way rational arguments work is if your premises, if your starting points, if your facts are in fact true, and your reasoning is actually properly constructed, and that's a whole course called logic if you want to study that. If your reasoning is properly constructed and if your facts are true, you then have an argument that's necessarily true also. I don't want to go too far down the logic tunnel. We'll break it down as we look at particular arguments instead of talking about it in the abstract like this. But the point of that comment is that we do have reason, even in ethics, to say that some arguments are better than others. Now, some of you know me as the art professor here at CCBC. I not only teach philosophy, I also teach art. And part of the reason those two things overlap is because they both make value claims. Value claims are things that are somewhat subjective, right? Me saying that, well, that painting's better than that painting. There's some subjectivity involved in that choice, in that judgment. And I would argue that it's not completely just random. There is a logic to it. It's just not as fixed as things like 2 + 2 = 4. And the same is true in ethics or morality. There is a logic to it, and I would say that some choices are better than others. And again, this whole semester is devoted to figuring out when some choices are better than others and how we arrive at those decisions, those judgments, in a meaningful, non-arbitrary way, and how we can have a dialogue between people who don't agree on their values, but how we can still have a dialogue and say, well, what should we as a people do? Okay, so let me go to chapter 2. I'm kind of talking in vague general terms, and it's probably best if we look at the chapter. So our chapter begins with talking about arguments and the logic that I mentioned, and it goes through some of the structures that we encounter in logic. And I'm going to let you go through that at your leisure. I also have some very helpful videos posted in Blackboard that talk about reasoning. I think there's 3 or 4 of them. And they go into a fair amount of depth in how logic works. So if you have more questions about logic and what makes an argument rational, please do take a look at those. Right. Now, as I kind of alluded to, not everybody believes the sales pitch I've just given you, that some arguments are better than others, and that some moral judgments are better than others. Some things are right and some things are wrong. Some people don't believe that, and they're called skeptics. Moral skepticism, that is what that is called. And moral skeptics don't believe that you can ever say that anything is right or wrong. There's a lot of different arguments for that position. One of them is called cultural relativism, uh, in which someone will point out, well, they don't believe the same thing I believe is as good in India, and since we don't agree, there must not be any moral high ground, if you will, or think some things are morally right or wrong. That's just being a bully and saying what you want to be moral is true and what another culture doesn't believe is false. Um, so that's called moral skepticism. Some people are total skeptics and don't believe that there's knowledge at all and that you can never determine that anything's true or false. And that's just called skepticism. Moral skepticism is the belief that you can't make moral judgments at all. One variety of that is cultural relativism. Uh, Well, I'm going to just flat out say it. I'm not a moral skeptic. Obviously, I wouldn't be teaching ethics if I was a moral skeptic. That would be a pretty bankrupt thing to do, because if you're a moral skeptic, it's all just a matter of opinion then. I'm going to do what I like, you're going to do what you're like, we'll agree to disagree, and that's the end of it. But pretty quickly we get to a position where we don't want to be moral skeptics. If you're a moral skeptic, the pedophile is just as moral as the person who is trying to protect a child. If you're a moral skeptic, killing someone for sport is no different than helping them cross the street. It's all just whatever gives you pleasure. And you wind up in a pretty brutal world pretty fast. Now, my desire not to live in a brutal world, of course, doesn't make it true that there's morality. But I know that's not a world I want to live in. And I also believe that if I can give you reasons why, say, something like pedophilia is immoral, if I can give you reasons and I can further bolster those reasons with factual research, how it hurts a child, maybe how it's not even good for you developmentally. If I can give you facts and I can give you reasons why you should not do that, then I think that I have made a moral argument and that any rational person would accept my moral argument as true and right. Okay, now maybe you'll believe that, maybe you won't. We will move through the semester looking at that and seeing if you agree or not. So that's moral skepticism, and it's the beginning point of the class, and there's the cultural differences argument in the text. And we kind of spend the rest of the semester trying to make arguments against moral skepticism and trying to see what we can instead offer as a reason to accept that there are moral truths and that that our moral positions are not merely beliefs or not merely opinions, but are actually true and right. Okay, I'm going to leave it at that. Please do read the chapter and then move on to read the selections in also in the Right Thing to Do book, which concern bioethics. I'll bring this over here. We have, here's our assignments. The applied, now this is a little different than last week. Last week we just started with what is morality. This week we are going to be moving into the ethics of biology, or bioethics. And be forewarned, next week we're going to do both of these things at the same time. We're going to look at some ethical theories in the elements of moral philosophy, and then we're going to excuse me, seek to apply those to particular ethical cases. Since we're just getting started, I separated those two activities into 2 separate weeks. So now we're looking at the ethics of biology in different situations. Please read these articles, a short introduction, or excuse me, we've already read that and that. The New Eugenics, Human Cloning and the Challenge of Regulation, Selling Organs for Transplantation, and a free market would reduce donations and would commodify the human body. You should notice that these two in particular, selling organs and a free market would reduce donations, these two, this is kind of a point counterpoint setup where these two are diametrically opposed to each other. All right, once you've read these, you are going to post your video position on one of the topics. I will list some very specific topics to keep you on track, and then you will watch each other's videos and reply with your counter arguments. You want to poke holes in each other's arguments to make them stronger. Once we've posted our video arguments on these topics, we will then be writing those up into 2-page position papers and submitting those in the following week. Okay, and this is how it will go every week, where we will have something from the Elements book, and then we will have some particular cases to look at. All right, thanks very much, and if you have questions, please do post them to the question discussion board. All right, thank you.